On October the 12th, 1976, the Ebola virus was discovered. It was found in a blood sample of a nun who died of an unknown disease. Now doctors had to go to the place of the patient's death in Zaire to determine where the virus came from and how it is transmitted. The research was carried out in the midst of an epidemic that claimed the lives of hundreds of people. The participants of this story showed such carelessness that the 1976 epidemic of the year had every chance of reaching Africa and, at the same time, Western Europe. A handful of doctors from 6 countries, 45 people, who rushed to the scene of the tragedy, did not let in, and it must be said that they were accompanied by supernatural luck. The source of the virus was probably a monkey taken in the equatorial province of Zaire, near the village of Yambuku. There worked a Catholic mission where Belgian priests and nuns served. In the colonial era, before Patrice Lumumba, Zaire was a Belgian Congo, and close ties were maintained with the former metropolis. During the mission, a school and a hospital functioned, which were well supplied with medicines from Europe and were very popular among the local population. Many walked between 50 and 60 kilometers to receive medical attention. The outpatient clinic received between 6,000 and 12,000 patients every month. On August 22nd, a teacher of the missionary school, accompanying his former students, bought dried meat of antelope and monkey from a hunter on the way. The antelope was eaten by the family and the monkey tasted one. On the 26th, she went to the hospital complaining of high fever, sore throat and stomach. With suspected malaria, he received a chloroquine injection and did not have a fever until September 1st. Then he came back and started bleeding from the stomach. On September 5th, the teachers were hospitalized and on September 8th, they died of hemorrhage. 9 people were treated in the same room. Before dying, they also bled from different places, from the mouth, ears, eyes, anus. It's terrible. The missionaries thought it was dysentery or yellow fever, but then where does the blood in the eyes come from? Interestingly, there was no one with a medical education at his hospital. The nearest professional doctor, Dr. Ngoy Mela, was working 100 kilometers away, in the center of the county, in the village of Bamba. On September 16th, he was called on a mission. After examining 17 patients, he said it was an unknown disease. They didn't believe him. The leading epidemiologists arrived from the country's capital, Kinshasa, and diagnosed typhoid fever. The sick nurse was transferred to Kinshasa under the supervision of experienced doctors. When he infected the medical staff already in the capital, a sample of his blood was taken to the Antwerp Institute of Tropical Medicine. It was transported in a conventional thermos flask, which on the way was correctly applied on something solid, which caused one of the 2 tubes to break. The meltwater with blood soaked a doctor's note placed in a thermos flask describing the clinical picture. The head of the infection research laboratory, Stefan Partino, ordered his employees to take this note with gloves. After all, it is an infection. But at the same time, the young doctors Peter Piot and Guido van der Grigen, who were engaged in virus cultivation, worked without masks and in cotton gowns. In addition, when his boss was handed a tube with microscopy material, he immediately dropped it, so the medium fell on the assistant's shoes. Patin already knew that 11 of the 17 missionaries had died, that an unknown virus caused the death of more than 70% of those infected. More, only the rabies virus, so he was horrified. Fortunately, those present were not confused. The floor was vividly disinfected, and the beautiful shoes went into the oven. Meanwhile, Dr. Mashola alerted the inhabitants of his province of the epidemic, and they, without any order, threw logs at the entrances of their villages, as their grandparents did when they heard about the smallpox epidemic. The information was spread by the royal tam-tams. Then there were enough people who understood their language. The mission hospital closed and the number of fever cases stopped increasing. But now the authorities in Kinshasa and the World Health Organization are horrified. The WHO ordered Patton to send the material to Britain, from where it would be transported to Atlanta, to the world's best laboratory at the US Center for Disease Control. It was also considered an option with Soviet laboratories equipped for the study of hemorrhagic fevers. However, Patton was offended to give the discovery in the wrong hands, and kept the material. They say that the Vero cells in which the virus was grown are not ready yet, etc. Van der Gruygen made a superfine cut that was sent for electron microscopy to the Antwerp University Hospital. It was made by Wim Jacob, a personal friend of Patton. A few hours later he returned with photos. Patton looked at them and asked, "What the hell is that?" Everyone is used to the fact that viruses are such balls with grains, like sea mines. And there were some worms in the picture. Patton was the only one in the room who knew that there were such viruses. "It looks like Marburg," he said. It didn't bode well. The fever virus, which sickened the monkeys brought from Uganda, was infected in Marburg by professionals, in a laboratory much better equipped than the one in Antwerp. The material was immediately packed and shipped to Britain. The next day, the Americans photographed this virus, and found that antibodies against the Marburg virus did not act on it. Patton did not calm down and turned to the Belgian Foreign Ministry, offering to send his employees to the place. It is not good when a virus discovered in Belgium is being investigated without the participation of Belgians. And then, "This is our Congo!" Since September 29th, bureaucrats have dismissed scientists, but this news galvanized them. Piot and Van der Gruygen were part of the international commission that the WHO created with doctors from Belgium, the United States, Canada, France, South Africa and Zaire. In Kinshasa, the head of the commission, Carl Johnson, divided the detachment into two parts. Some ensure the isolation of patients in the capital's hospital, and others, only volunteers, will go to Yambuka and there they will establish infection routes and, if possible, a vector. Bed bugs, mosquitoes, bats and rodents were suspected. Peter Piot volunteered first. By nature, I was skeptical and did not believe much in scary stories. This helped him convince the military pilots to take the mission to the Bumba airfield. The pilots flatly refused at first. They said that they themselves had seen sick birds falling on the fly, and unburied bodies along the roads. In Kinshasa, where the sounds of the tam-tams did not reach, they did not know what was happening in the epidemic zone. And there the hunger began. The quarantine was declared just in time for the rice and coffee harvest, and the province was cut off from the big land from which fuel was transported. Now, apart from the hunting booty, the Aborigines had nothing to offer to the exchange. The plane that delivered the expedition was the first in 3 weeks. He was greeted by a crowd of 1,000 people waiting for him to bring products. They were very disappointed to see the epidemiologists in the Land Rover. But the photo of the virus made an extraordinary impression on the crowds of natives. The mysterious death that deprived them of a normal life has not yet received a name, but it became clear what it looks like. It materialized. In each village, while they were dismantling the debris on the road, Piot showed a treasured photo and asked if there were any sick people. Almost even the village of Yambuku did not exist. The fever sufferers gathered together when they finally arrived at the ill-fated mission. While the children were catching rats, bats and bedbugs for the expedition, in which the virus was never found, doctors took blood samples and interviewed those mourning the dead. The incidence curve on the graph clearly tilted downward, a trend that emerged immediately after the closing of the missionary hospital on September 30th. The majority of those affected were those who attended the outpatient clinic. Among them, women of childbearing age predominated. Then everyone who communicated with them got sick and died with terrible bleeding, but the source was the hospital. The first to guess was Dr. Masamba, a sanitary inspector from Lisala, who knew his men well. Africans do not trust pills and drugs, considering them weak, but the injection for them is dawa, that is, a real and effective medicine. Pregnant women often asked the missionary nurses to inject them with something, and they injected them with vitamin B and calcium gluconate. There is no harm, but it invigorates, which pregnant women exhausted by hard work really liked. Peter Piot went to the sealed mission building to see the procedure room. The rubber lids of the solution cans were filled with syringe needles. Some jars were completely covered with cotton wool. And then a terrible suspicion fell on the Belgians. They communicated every night with the surviving sisters of the mission, enjoying a glass of vermouth in their native Flemish language. And when the nuns' tongues were untied, they were asked exactly how they were injected. Genoveva's sister, Gijsbrechts, excitedly said that they had boiled her glass syringes since morning, along with the obstetric instruments. Then, throughout the day, the same syringe pricked the arriving patients, changing the needles and rinsing the syringe after each injection with clean water. That's enough, right? It was very difficult to answer this question. How to tell the selfless women who have killed their best years in this jungle that they have caused the death of 280 people by their bad preparation? And what will the locals do when they hear that paramedics spread an infection that would otherwise end up in a monkey meat eater? Does this dark crowd delve into subtleties? And that wasn't important now. The activities of the mission were stopped anyway. Now the word is in quarantine and antibody-rich blood plasma for 12% of the sick who managed to recover. Finally, the disease should be given a name. The Bourbon of Kentucky was the leader of the expedition. Among them, its members called the disease Yambuku fever, after the place of the incident. But Joel Bremen, responsible for the eradication of smallpox in Zaire, replied, "Lassa fever was discovered here in Nigeria, so Nigerians began to talk about all the inhabitants of the city of Lassa. Those who live in Yambuku do not deserve this, they are not to blame for the epidemic." Johnson discovered an unknown fever in Bolivia and named it after the Mukchupo River that flows in those places. The Congo River was located here, but it had already been discovered by Mikhail Chumakov, the Crimean hemorrhagic fever. From the rivers around Yambuku, Ebola came closest, translated from the Lingala language, Black River, a short word and a gloomy meaning.